I think as a founder, you really need to be looking to this near horizon. You can now stand on the shoulders of these robotic giants rather than having to build the robots yourselves.
What new classes of problems emerge in a robot society, right? Charging stations, injuries, personal injury, maintenance, clothing lines, I don't know.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is a Reacts episode. Industry insiders having frank debates about the latest tech, politics, and business news. Whether you're a founder, investor, or operator in a startup, you'll gain insights into how current events connect to broader themes and trends that impact your startup, your investments, and your day-to-day operational decisions. The conversation starts now.
Hey, I'm Chris Saad.
And I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
And on today's show, we're going to talk about Meta, Apple, Google, and all the big companies investing in robotics. It's getting really real out here. What does it mean for founders? What does it mean for engineers? What does it mean for investors? We're also going to talk a little bit about Elon Musk and his Grok 3. What does it reveal about his attention to detail, his focus, and his ability to execute while distracted, doging up the government? And then finally, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about two big meta trends that Yaniv and I have noticed and we wanted to explore with the audience. The first is about AI replacing junior roles in general and junior software engineers specifically. What does it mean for the economy? What does it mean for your country? And what does it mean for your future career aspirations? And then finally, the opportunity for mind-boggling value creation. We have some tips and tricks for you to how to capture millions and billions of dollars for you, your family, and your startup. So we're not going to tell you too much about that until the end. Stay tuned all the way to the end to hear about that on this week's show. All that, much, much more right after the break. Stay tuned.
Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Vanta automates compliance with SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. And it gets even better. Just for TSP listeners, you can get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off. Wait, Chris, you said that we could get started right after the break, but actually there's something you forgot, which is that we need to tell people about the Startup Podcast Pact. If you listen to this show and you want us to keep doing it, you love what we do, you want to help us, the best thing you can do for us and the thing that we ask you to do in return for the value that we are giving you is make sure that more people know about us by subscribing to us in your favorite listening app, giving us a review, following us on YouTube, and giving us a shout out on LinkedIn or wherever it is that you have your audience. We love the shout outs, we love the reviews and the ratings, and it really helps more people find us and hopefully get that value that you're getting to. All right, now we can jump in. The first thing we wanted to talk about is the concrete moves that some of the biggest players in tech are making around humanoid robotics. Meta, for example, are kicking off a new unit in their reality lab for robotics. And this is maybe a bit of a pivot, a recognition that their VR world isn't really coming to fruition. Instead of, I suppose, creating virtual reality, we're moving some of that virtualization into the real world with robotics. At the same time, Apple has also kicked off a research unit that is seriously investigating robotics. And apparently, according to this report in Bloomberg, there is a roadmap of robotic type devices that Apple is planning on releasing, culminating in a humanoid robot. That will obviously be several years away. Apple are pretty conservative, but they are moving into robotics and headed in that direction. And similarly, Google DeepMind, which is, of course, the division of Google that has been responsible for a lot of the fundamental progress in AI and LLMs that has brought us to this moment, is now investing directly in robotics. So a lot of things happening where these companies are now taking robotics seriously the way they were taking AI, or perhaps the way they started taking AI seriously a couple of years ago. So Chris, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, you combine that with Boston Dynamics, reboot into electronic robots with their Atlas robot. Figure just raised $1.5 billion with a B at a $39 billion valuation for their incredible robots. You talk about NVIDIA and their robotics platforms and tools, which, by the way, is another reason why I'm bullish on NVIDIA way beyond GPUs. We're entering the era of robotics, of embodied AI, and this is very, very exciting. To look at this more broadly, new platforms generate massive new value and invention. but also new form factors, which themselves are forms of platforms, generate massive new value and change, right? If you think of the advent of the personal computer from the mainframe, the advent of the laptop, the web was kind of a change in form factor, iPhone, earbuds, and now we're heading into, I think, glasses, and we're heading into robots. This is going to be, another 10, 20, 30, 50-year cycle of just massive, massive value creation, invention. We're finally seeing our Jetsons future, flying robots and AI and all this sort of stuff. I don't know about flying robots, but we'll see.
We might.
And I'm giddy with excitement about it, honestly. I think this is why I got into technology, was a talking car in Knight Rider and the AI computer in Star Trek. And we're sort of finally seeing this hard tech play out instead of this kind of trivialities of social networks and social apps. I think, what are the implications for founders? It's a new form factor sitting on top of a new software platform, generative AI, which means a whole raft of new problems, opportunities, and exciting startup bets can be made. That's number one. And number two, it means that there is huge amounts of capital that is of hardware quantities, right? It used to be just software capital. Silicon Valley was afraid of hardware for a long time, which is ironic given it's called Silicon Valley. But the hardware is back, baby. And so those are the two big takeaways. Whole classes of new opportunities and problems, and whole classes of new investment categories that are opening up, and just dollars and dollars and dollars being poured in.
I agree. And, maybe another thing to think about in this context is that we can move up the stack. So I think until now, we've had robotic startups. But what does it mean to be a robotic startup? It means you're doing something about the creation of robots, right? Sort of fundamental research or fundamental development of robotics technologies or control technology for robots and things like that. In the same way that an AI startup 5 years ago was doing like stuff in AI. But now we talk about this incredible flourishing in AI. AI is now a tool that you can leverage to solve real world problems, right? So we've gone from, okay, we're building this sort of foundational technology to we're now thinking about how we can leverage that foundational technology. And I think similarly, to use robotics in your startup, you no longer have to be a robotic startup, or at least, over the coming 12 months, I see that increasingly true. There is a platform for you to leverage, right? There are robots out there. They're all programmable. They're becoming increasingly affordable. So start to think, if you have access to robots and you can program them, what sort of product could you build that leverages that tool? Or if you're trying to solve a problem, right? We talk about falling in love with the problem. How could robotics be part of the solution? It's another tool to now add to your toolkit. And so I think as a founder, you really need to be looking to this near horizon. It's gone from far horizon to near horizon. Certainly not mainstream yet, but this is where some of the biggest opportunities come. And you can now stand on the shoulders of these robotic giants rather than having to build the robots yourselves.
And also, what new classes of problems emerge in a robot society? Charging stations, injuries, personal injury, insurance, maintenance, training, personality, hot swaps, jailbreaks, clothing lines. I don't know, right? There's this whole new class.
Come with me if you want to live.
Exactly. Time machine, time travels.
Yeah, time travel and like laser blasters. Okay. So robotics, it's a trend that's coming. It's real technology. And I think we're living in these exciting times. And Chris, you say it's like science fiction and you're giddy. And it's true that a lot of these things have been science fiction tropes for such a long time that it's sort of easy to dismiss them, right? I grew up watching the Jetsons. Some of our younger listeners may not have heard of it, but it was this sort of retro futuristic sci-fi show that was originally created, I think, in the 60s, flying cars and household robots and so on. And that future never eventuated, right? Instead, we got the internet and cheap commercial jet travel and, all sorts of other things that seem more prosaic to us. So we were on a different timeline. And so it becomes easy to dismiss robotics as nearly this retro thing, right? Robots and AI are like a future that didn't happen. But the funny thing is, it is now happening. And so see through some of that weird, romanticized mid-20th century thinking that you may have dismissed and be like, okay, here is the technology that's available today. What kinds of amazing things can I do with it? And that's where I see AI and robotics kind of nearly sitting together in this current trend.
Yeah, we got the information revolution, right? But we never got the material science and the hardware revolution. And we went down this deep, deep rabbit hole of information technology And now it's we're playing catch up.
I mean, on behalf of material scientists everywhere, I would say if you look at advances in fiber optics, in chip fabrication, and things like that, there have been incredible material science advances, just not in the directions that we expected.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm just talking about stuff you can physically hold in your hands, like robots, like flying cars that defy gravity, this kind of stuff.
The next topic we wanted to talk about, and we're going to do this one quickly, Chris, because I really wanted to not talk about Elon Musk on this episode. And so we will not quite keep to our commitment, but we'll keep it brief, which is XAI, which is Elon Musk's AI, something, whatever, that's sort of connected to X and Tesla, but a somewhat independent entity, released the newest version of its Grok frontier model. I must admit, I did not watch the presentation, so I will not comment on this as an expert. My understanding is it is roughly competitive with the latest frontier models on standard AI benchmarks. Not way ahead of them, not way behind them. So it is a very good model. But, Chris, I feel like this is kind of a bit of a big letdown because a very good model is no longer interesting, right? There are so many frontier models out there that are really very good and roughly competitive with each other that yet another one doesn't really shake the world, right? We already have, as well as GPT series, which has been the traditional leader. We have Gemini from Google. We have Llama from Meta. We have Anthropic. We have Mistral. We have so many, and of course, DeepSeek, which we were talking about a few weeks ago. And now Grok, which unlike DeepSeek spent vast amounts of money, XAI spent vast amounts of money training this model, come up with another really very good model. What was amazing science fiction a year ago is just, and also ran today. So yeah, whatever.
Yeah, look, everyone is always quick to point out you can't bet against Elon. Elon has done amazing things. He launches rockets into the skies, builds electric cars. But his personal life, that's the trouble. That's the problematic thing. More and more recently, I think his actual achievements are asymptoting. And I don't think it's because of his lack of ability. I think it's because of his lack of attention. The robo-taxis continues to be too little, too late. And I think Grok is kind of a half-hearted, diffused in focus type of attempt. His big reveal is a product and a model that isn't that good, especially compared to the state of the art. And, on the live stream, and I mostly caught the tail end of it, was a lot of excuses of, it's still pretty rough. And if you check back in a week, it'll be better. And we wanted to launch the voice version, but we couldn't do that. If you check back in a little while, it'll be there. And it's just like, honestly, the three engineers I saw with him, they kind of looked like hostages. Honestly, they were just like worried what Elon was going to say and what he was going to promise on the live stream. Maybe I was projecting. Maybe I was reading too much into it. I think his businesses are suffering. I think their brands are suffering. And there are actually protests now against Tesla. There are people who, I'm in a number of back channels where people are judging others for being on X, basically supporting, they're really literally saying it's like supporting anti-Semitism and fascism. Elon has a serious brand problem. And his argument would be, the world is more important, saving the world is more important than my brand. I think it's gonna start feeling it at the stock price and in other places as well. So look, he's smarter than any 10 or 50 people combined, and so he may be able to continue to coast on the talent of his teams and the partial attention of his brain. But I think he is struggling, and it's clear. And I think for all our sakes, I think he refocuses and gets back to business.
Well, here's a theory that I actually haven't heard floated before, although I'm sure it's not original. It's original to me. If you actually look at Elon's history of successes and failures, there's a pattern, and the pattern is his successes are generally in the physical world. He is amazing at kind of making things happen in the world with physical objects, with physical technology, atoms, not bits, that nobody has done before or nobody's been able to commercialize before. If I look at the achievements that I still, think are incredible from Elon Musk, I guess there are 2.5 or 3, I suppose. One of them is obviously Tesla, which kickstarted the EV revolution. The next is SpaceX, which has clearly restarted the space revolution and is clearly the preeminent company there. And then the half, because it sort of sits on the back of SpaceX, is Starlink, right? Physical things, that's what he's really good at. He's good at making things happen fast in the sort of physical engineering space. And the reason I mention this also in the context of Grok is when you look at, again, I'm not like deeply immersed in this story. My understanding is the amazing things Elon has done at XAI is get like massive GPU clusters spun up faster than anyone has ever done before. He goes in there, he sleeps in the data center, he does that Elon playbook, and their massive cluster is kind of a wonder. But then what do you do with the cluster? Then you're in the software and in the research space. And his track record there is much patchier, right? He was part of the PayPal mafia, but don't forget he was fired from PayPal. I don't think he was like one of the luminaries there. X is obviously a disaster. Full self-driving at Tesla is a running joke and, frankly, securities fraud at this point. And then we're looking at Grok, which is not inspiring. So it's hard to point at a massive software layer success that Elon Musk has had. And so in that sense, maybe it's not that surprising.
Cluster is the key word when it comes to Elon. All right. Actually, one last point on that. I heard that he just fired a bunch of people in the FDA that are overseeing neural interfaces and stuff that oversee his Neuralink.
Good example. Another amazing piece of hardware, right?
Well, in theory, but he just fired a bunch of people who are overseeing that in the government, and I think he's also doing stuff that for the regulators and oversights for SpaceX. So the conflicts of interest we all knew are coming thick and fast already.
Over 7,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, Flow Health, and Quora all use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. Why aren't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
In any case, let's move on to topic number 3. We actually have 2 topics we want to talk about in our musing corner. We every episode, every now and then, we like to talk about meta trends that either Yaniv or myself have noticed and put them out there for people to react to. Yaniv, I think you have one about software engineers and AI.
Yeah, Chris, by the way, I was talking about this offline, but I think it's maybe worth mentioning in the episode. I actually want us to do more of this because we call this TSP React, but the fact is we started getting very reactive to the moves of a few people especially in US politics and whatnot. And it's nearly like what they want the world to do is just react to all the things they're doing. And at a certain point, it just becomes commentary. And I think this stuff that we're about to talk about is a bit more thoughtful, a bit deeper, and more actionable for founders because we're going to be talking about trends that you need to be aware of, you need to be thinking of. So with that little bit of editorializing, I'll get off my soapbox and talk about something I posted on LinkedIn, and I wanted to discuss it with you here, Chris. I posted about something that I'm seeing from people I respect, not just announcements from people like Mark Zuckerberg, but people I know and respect about AI being at the level of a junior software developer for coding and creating software. And that therefore, these people who I know and respect and who have hands-on knowledge are starting to either hire fewer junior software engineers or look for more seniors. And generally the idea here is if you look at a traditional software engineering team structure, right, you have your juniors and your seniors, and the juniors end up writing a lot of the code, but they lack the architectural understanding, the taste, the experience as to how everything else fits together. And so a senior engineer often spends less of their own time coding and more of their time mentoring, instructing the junior engineers, and then reviewing their work, right? And so in a sense, the junior engineer is this black box, if you want to think about it, where you put a prompt in, which is, this is the code I'd like you to write. This is the feature or the software I'd like you to build. And then it produces an output and you review it and make sure that it works well. And so in a sense, if that is the interface, you can see, Chris, that there's a relatively easy kind of drop-in replacement from a junior software engineer to an AI that can take a well-formulated prompt, produce pretty good code, and then have the senior engineer review that. And so this is happening today, folks. This is not a bunch of tech bros in Silicon Valley who are talking their book. These are founders across the world and also bigger, more progressive companies, more technologically progressive is what I mean, who are really going deep on AI and completely changing how they develop software. That is a thing that I believe is happening. And of course, it creates massive challenges, right? Because in a sense, what AI is doing here is it is kicking out the bottom couple of rungs of the software engineer career ladder, right? So it's terrible for juniors, but it's also ultimately terrible for everybody because where will the next generation of seniors come from if software developers can't get on that ladder? And of course, software engineering is not the only industry or the only profession in which this is happening. I've heard that it's happening in design, in copywriting, in a lot of different places. And Chris, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. I got a bunch of interesting reactions on LinkedIn, which I can speak to as well. But you're the guy who likes to talk about taste, and, the things that come with experience. And, we are entering a world where you can leverage that taste and that experience with more and more tools. But how do people in this world acquire that taste and experience in the first place?
I have a number of reactions to this. The first is that this accelerates this deepening of the divide between the haves and the have-nots, the experienced and the inexperienced. By knocking out some rungs in the ladder, you are, by definition, making it harder to get onto the ladder and climb that ladder. And so there is a real risk that a generation of people get left behind.
Yep.
Now, the counter argument, of course, is each of those individuals that are coming out of school have superpowers. They have their own junior or senior engineers, mentors, and so on by their side. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they have the opportunities for corporate experience, for peer learning, and for collaboration they might have had elsewhere. You also mentioned that this is happening everywhere, and it is. It's happening in junior marketing executives and junior copywriters and junior everything. One of the things that drives me crazy is, if you listen to an All-In podcast.
I don't listen to the All-In podcast, mate, and you shouldn't either.
I do. I do. And their lack of awareness and empathy is breathtaking. They talk about, Friedberg was talking about how this AI thing is fantastic. We have analysts now that would do things that would have taken weeks. They do that in just a few hours with a deep research prompt. And this just means that they can do more analyst work. This is fantastic. Their leverage is way higher. And what is everyone worried about? What they're worried about is that it's massively deflationary. And if one person can do the job of 10 people, maybe you don't fire anybody, but you definitely don't hire any more people, right? And so what that does is it certainly accelerates the economy, makes it more productive. It makes labor more productive, which concentrates wealth at capital. And capital is loving this. This is fantastic. You get more work out of fewer people, fewer bodies. But the reality is that while the economy may accelerate and we may get a 10x, 100x economy, we may get 10x or 100x more jobs and more problems and more things to do. That might be true in the fullness of time. But that transition from here to there is going to be massively, massively painful. I don't care how many labor shortages you point to, how much growth you point to, how previous technology cycles always created more jobs. We're talking about the disentanglement, the disintermediation, the disintegration of intelligence from biology. This is not a joke, people. And so, yes, junior engineers, junior marketers, junior copywriters, junior everything, junior sales associates, not even junior, but senior customer support agents. That's all going away. India, you guys are fucked.
Dude, you can't say that.
Philippines, you're fucked.
That sounds pretty unempathetic yourself, Chris.
I'm not saying it with glee. I'm not saying it with a lack of awareness. I'm saying you need to pay attention. It's the bat signal, right? Unlike an All-In, which goes, it's all fine, it's going to be great, just more productivity. That's a lack of empathy. Saying to your friends, you guys are fucked, wake up, something is coming for you. That's not a lack of empathy. Everyone needs to be paying attention to how do you evolve your economy, your families, your skills to adapt really, really quickly to this. Really quickly.
Look, you're not fucked, but you could be fucked, right? I often, it's a cliched metaphor, but it's a good one, right? Which when I look at something like AI, it's a big bloody wave that is coming. And when there's a big wave that's coming, you can either ride it or get dumped and crushed by it. And so it's like, get ready for this wave. Like it's right on top of you. You better get ready for this thing fast. And, actually one of the things, and, I'm going to quote with attribution, but without permission, so I hope it's okay. Like I said, I got a lot of really great comments on my post. And one of them is from Lewis Thompson Milne, who is, I guess, a LinkedIn friend of mine. Hi, Lewis. He mentioned that graphic design has nearly gone through this same transition, but 6 to 12 months earlier, maybe even a bit more compared to software development. And I asked him, what's actually happened there? And he said this: pretty inventive, honestly. A lot of the low-level guys stepped out on their own, or they pivoted some of their skill sets to provide complementary angles. Think more pairing with AI or offering early-level conceptual discussions rather than the doing. Still shaking out, honestly, but it hasn't ended the career path. And so I guess in response to, what could come across as a bit of a doom and gloom from you, Chris, I think there's a major challenge, but there is also a way to respond to this, right? And I think the point that Lewis is making there is really where my head is at, which is that there is a challenging transition in the shape of the career path. And it's challenging in the sense that it puts a lot of pressure on junior people to not just be this like black box, like I said, that receives instructions and produces output, but actually, ironic in the context of, a lot of hype around AI agents, to show true agency, right? And I've got some optimism about this. Like, I work with a lot of Gen Z or Gen Z folks, depending what part of the world you're in. And I feel it's the most entrepreneurial generation I've ever come across. They naturally understand that everything can be a bit of a hustle and they can start a side business and they don't have to do the sort of finish school, go to university, get a grad job, whatever. You can kind of shape your own career. But that has gone from, I guess, an exciting alternative option to kind of soon that's going to be what you have to do, right? To show value as a junior, you're going to have the sort of hustle and entrepreneurialism that allows you to make up for the lack of taste, skill, experience that only comes with time. I think that is valid. I think my concern is not everyone has that temperament. And so what happens to people who are naturally more passive, who may have been, the epitome of like the big company person in a previous generation? What are they going to do when this wave comes?
That's what I'm saying, Yaniv. The talking track is always like, there's going to be more opportunities than ever, and people will be able to hustle, and people will be able to be entrepreneurial. It's like a 96% problem, right? 1% of people are entrepreneurial. 5% of people are maybe a little bit more on the leading edge. The rest of the world is relatively passive. They do the job they're given. They're looking for architectures and structures and lattices to fit inside. If and when those lattices evaporate, what you're not going to be left with is a bunch of entrepreneurial people excited about retraining. What you're going to be left with is a bunch of people out of work. I don't want to be the doomer I'm not a doomer. I'm an enthusiastic techno-optimist. But what I don't like being is Pollyannic and mincing words around things that are potentially really catastrophic. And so, look, maybe this dire warning is for nothing. Maybe it turns out to be an exaggeration. Maybe. And that's fine. But I'm saying you should probably be vigilant, if not preparing, if you're listening to the sound of my voice, to not be the 94%, 95% of people who are caught flat-footed in your particular ecosystem, right? Again, I'm talking about India, Philippines, and so on. These particular people I'm talking about, these jobs that I'm talking about, you're used to showing up to an office, getting a script, and walking people through either code or through a help desk. You're not an entrepreneur. You're just not, right? And so you just have to be aware of that for your friends, your family, and your colleagues and your economy.
Okay, like let's sort of talk about what's actionable and what's not. Like, we're not here to solve the world's problems. We don't have all the solutions. But I think if you're listening to this and, you are making your way in your career, you're not a founder. I know not only founders listen to this show, or actually, Chris, if you're a parent and you're worried about your kid's future in this world, I would say, yes, think about, when I use the word be entrepreneurial, I don't necessarily mean start your own business or anything like that. I think it is about demonstrating that sense of agency, not waiting to be told what to do, not waiting to be asked what to do. Figure things out for yourself, try different things, and actively look for ways to add value to people in your lives and ultimately in your work lives. I think that is sort of the actionable advice there. And if I may pivot to what is the actionable advice for founders? Because it's an interesting thing. Like I said, I got all sorts of reactions to my post. And one of them was kind of accusing me of the type of heartlessness that you just rightly accused the all-in crew of. Which is, it's like, how dare you talk about the fact that, humans are going to be replaced with AI and suggesting that perhaps that's a thing to do.
It's ridiculous to accuse you of heartlessness for pointing out a possible, challenge that human beings are going through.
Look, I've got a heart on my shirt, and this is me trolling you, Chris. Help me check this out.
You have a Yaris shirt. I don't know if you're trolling me or trolling yourself,
It was actually originally designed to troll Tim Fung, the founder and CEO of Airtasker, who was my boss and is as big a car guy as you, Chris. And it really pissed him off that I drove a Yaris. So then I got this shirt for him.
Just outing yourself as having no taste, Yaniv. That's all you're doing.
I'm outing myself as having better things to do, my friend.
Okay, all right.
I'm very much on the sort of Scott Galloway from Pivot Pod sort of point of view on this, which is, I've called myself in the past a reluctant capitalist, which means I used to be a bit anti-capitalist. I strongly believe in capitalism now as this incredible engine of innovation and the potential to improve people's lives. But it's good at some things and not good at other things, right? The way capitalism works is you regulate it well and you have the right laws, but then every business within the system only really has one job, which is to make money and comply with the law, right? You don't expect businesses to have an altruistic purpose because that doesn't scale. That is not robust. That is the government's job, which is why, by the way, I really believe in government to get to our political side of the discussion. So if you're a startup founder, if you're a business owner, it is not your job to make sure that junior software engineers or junior anything else have a career path. It is simply not your job. Your job is to create a successful business. And so these AI tools represent a massive opportunity. And of course, in capitalism, a massive opportunity not taken is a massive threat because other people will take that opportunity and will cut your lunch. So this is an amazing time. You can be so much leaner. You can build your business with fewer people. In particular, you can build your software with fewer people. You still need great senior folks with taste and experience, but they can now get so much more built if they use these tools correctly. And it is kind of your responsibility, or even more than responsibility, it's simply a necessity as a founder to keep up with these tools and see where you can get these massive productivity improvements, these massive cost savings. And don't listen to the people who say that you owe a bunch of young people a job just because. That is society's problem. That is not your problem.
Yaniv, I don't think anybody says that you owe a bunch of young people a job, except maybe like Australians who believe in this egalitarian nonsense. As an owner of a commercial enterprise, you need to deploy capital as wisely as possible, and you will.
You must.
And everyone else around you will. You must. And as you said, it's an imperative for you and your family to start acting entrepreneurial and start building the kind of platforms that disrupt all of the people I'm talking about. And because everybody is incentivized to disrupt the people I'm talking about, they will be disrupted. And for anyone to accuse you or me of being heartless or somehow advocating for it is a little bit silly. Again, please stop listening to the podcast.
No, do what you like. You do you, folks.
But this is a thing that needs to be discussed. Not discussing it does no one a service. Speaking of starting startups with fewer engineers, a new platform just got announced from a Y Combinator company called With Woz, which I assume is Steve Wozniak, Steve Jobs' co-founder. It's intended to be your technical co-founder, and it gets products, apps into production from a prompt. Production mobile apps from a prompt. So check it out, withwoz.com. I haven't tried it yet, but just further to that trend.
Yeah. But I mean, it's an interesting thing. And like, here's my take on the state of the art for people who are listening. Like I said, I think that AI is now at the state that it can do the work of many junior software engineers or junior developers. Like I said, I have this on good authority from people who are deep in the trenches. And they said 6 months ago that wasn't true. Today it is. But you still need that senior person to drive the tool. And, is it possible that AI will get to the point of being able to act as a technical co-founder? Well, quite possibly, because you don't count out AI, especially when super intelligence is probably on the way. But my suspicion is today, let somebody else get burnt by an AI CTO.
You definitely got to go near the tool. You got to learn its limitations, understand what it does, and make your own judgments. You can't just sort of write it off without trying it. You got to try it out. It's going to be cool. Now, to switch gears entirely from my panicked warning for those in India and in the Philippines, I want to switch gears to another musing topic, this time something I mused on Facebook and on LinkedIn that I wanted to share, which is actually to the upside. And it's all related. It's all related to what we've been talking about, which is this idea that mind-boggling levels of value creation, of new opportunity occurs when one or more of these three things change. And we've talked about this on the podcast many times before. When regulations change, think of how when cannabis was legalized in the US, that created entire industries, entire companies, entire opportunities. I also think of the regulations changing around Uber, which made Uber possible. Otherwise, it would have ultimately killed it. Or when technology platforms shift, think of the web changing everything for technology, the iPhone, creating the App Store and billions and trillions of economic value, crypto, creating a lot of new value, although not as much as some had hoped, and now AI. And then think of changes in culture, the culture of, hey, you shouldn't meet strangers from the internet, flipped on its head to, hey, we should be meeting everybody from the internet, which made apps like Airbnb and Uber and Tinder become very, very real. So there's three things: regulations, technology, and culture. If one or more of them change, massive new opportunities are created. And the observation that I made on LinkedIn recently is that we are experiencing a major shift in all three of these fundamental things. Not one, not two, but three. On the regulations front, Trump is proposing massive deregulation or undermining the institutions that enforce that regulation. So there's huge shifts in regulatory posture in the US. The technology platforms are obviously changing. We just talked about robotics on today's show. We talk about AI in every show. AI and robotics is a massive platform shift. Just couldn't be bigger. And in the third, culture, for better or for worse, especially in the US, but I think it's happening around the world, there's a massive shift from the left to the right. There is a distrust of authority and experts, and people are wanting to take care of themselves and almost to position themselves in opposition to or an antagonism of authority. And there's a huge, related to all of the above, there's a huge risk-on vibe when it comes to capital allocation. So these are three huge things that have shifted, the three huge things that have shifted at the same time. And this is just, I think, massive, massive tailwinds for a huge opportunity for most companies, most domains. I just wanted to bring that to people's attention. I think we've talked many times about the AI shift and the AI opportunity, but it's now buttressed, it's now combined with those two other shifts. And I just think this is just a real catalyzing opportunity, an opportunity to raise millions of dollars and get back to blitzscaling, get back to scaling as fast and as hard as you can. And so I wanted to put that out there, and I'd love to get your thoughts.
Well, I mean, to quote who I assume is everybody's favorite bad guy in Game of Thrones, Littlefinger, chaos is a ladder. I just talked about AI kicking out a few rungs of the career ladder for developers, but actually all of this change, all of this churn, it unseats and unsettles incumbents' existing systems. It is, as you say, ripe with opportunity. Now, don't be like Littlefinger, because he was a bad dude and he ended up dead. So make good use of this chaos ladder. But, the ladder is there. I think that is your point, Chris. And, whether you use it for good or evil is up to you. But it would be foolish to ignore the vast opportunities that are created when systems change.
And, lest the audience be confused about my position here, right? So in the last topic, I was expressing panic and fear, and now I'm expressing a lot of optimism, and I want to make it clear why that shift. In the last topic, I was expressing a lot of anxiety for everyday people. I'm talking about large quantities of low-paid and sometimes low-skilled engineers in India. Sometimes they're very high-skilled, and low-skilled, low-paid call centers in places like the Philippines, where those people are not entrepreneurs. They are not looking to change the world, and their livelihoods will be decimated unless they're paying close attention. Why will they be decimated? Because of this second thing I'm pointing to, which is if you are an entrepreneur, you are a game changer, you are a first principles thinker, there is massive opportunity for you to create that change and to capture that value at the expense, potentially, not necessarily, of others. And so I'm very optimistic for those who can capture that value. And so these are not, in opposition or contradictory modes or moods, if you will. They're related. And I'm encouraging the audience to think about being on the second part of that equation and not on the first.
I like to think that you, listener, audience of the Startup Podcast, are a high agency person. And like I said, I think even more than using that term entrepreneurial, I think it really is about high agency. Chris, you actually talked a few weeks ago, you said you found a really interesting thing that Mark Zuckerberg said in his interview with Joe Rogan. Neither of them my favorite people, but I think you're right to point out the wisdom of this, which is that the one thing that humans will have left that AI in some sense cannot replace is willpower. That actual decision of, what it is to do and that drive to get it done. That is the thing. I think high agency people with willpower who then act on that willpower are the ones who are going to benefit a lot from the current set of changes. So I agree with you. And so, yes, for you, dear listener, high willpower, high agency, totally awesome person who clicks on our ads, it's a pretty exciting time. But yes, for society at large, for a variety of reasons that I think we've spelled out, Chris, it's a bit of a scary time.
Yeah, speaking of agency, actually, let's put a plug in here for Reid Hoffman's new book, Super Agency,
Look at
which
that.
speaks
Are
about...
we getting paid for this?
We are not getting paid for this.
Damn it.
But the tag is what could possibly go right with our AI future. And this book is really a wonderful narrative around the intersection of AI, agency, and what could go right. I think for the people who read this book, the people who listen to this podcast, the people who, as you said, Yaniv, are high agency and are now have the potential to become and have super agency thanks to their AI tools, the world could look very bright for you. Could.
I've already read the book. It's a great book. You should do it.
But if for people who are middle of the road, middle managers who are middling in their agency, in their cognitive, in a cognitive capacity, or in their hustle, you need to wake up if you're listening to the sounds of our voices. It's time to hustle. And I'll say that to myself and you, Yaniv, as much as the audience. It's time to get shit done.
Well, let's wrap up this episode so we can get back to hustling. Chris, people would like to get in touch with you, learn more about what your thoughts are, or even the possibility of working with you. I know you provide some really great services. How can they get in touch?
Yeah, you can learn more about me over at chrissaad.com and chrissaad.com/advisory, or subscribe to my newsletter over at chrissaad.com/newsletter, or all the social media at Chris Saad. How are you, Yaniv?
Chris is hustling to help you hustle. I am on LinkedIn, trying to make it less boring, trying not to engage with all the trolls there. I'm completely failing at that. So if you see me doing it, maybe give me a little slap on the wrist. But before that, connect with me and tell me you're a TSP listener. I get a couple of requests a week from listeners, which I always love to accept. So, yep, that is the place to find me. All right, Chris, it was a good discussion. I'm glad we kept it Elon light, at least if it's not Elon free. Have a great week.
Have a great week. Catch you next one. Bye-bye.
Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Vanta. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. Over 7,000 global companies already use Vanta. Why don't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.